You are not going to believe what happened after my HOA decided they could treat my property like it belonged to them. A few years ago, I bought a massive piece of land out in the countryside, around 100 acres total. It was exactly what I had always wanted. Quiet, private, wide open space with endless possibilities. To me, it felt like my own little piece of paradise where I could finally build a life I've been planning for years. Now, the property itself had a strange shape to it, almost like an uneven puzzle piece. One small section of the land, roughly 5 acres or so, bordered a brand new suburban housing development. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Before buying a place, I did everything properly. I paid for a professional survey, checked the title records, and made sure all the paperwork was legitimate. The property markers were clearly placed, the boundary lines were documented, and legally the entire parcel belonged to me. For the next few years, I lived quietly in a small cabin on the far side of the property. I mostly kept to myself and enjoyed the peace. My long-term plan was to eventually build my dream house out there and maybe even start a small cattle ranch someday. Honestly, life was pretty great, at least until the day everything changed. One afternoon, I decided to walk the perimeter of my property just to inspect the survey markers and make sure everything still looked good. As I got closer to that 5-acre corner near the subdivision, I started hearing noises that immediately seemed out of place. Water splashing, kids screaming and laughing, music playing somewhere in the distance. I remember stopping for a second thinking, what on earth is going on over there? Then I walked through a small patch of trees and completely froze. Right there, sitting on my land, was a gigantic brand new community swimming pool. I'm talking full-scale resort style. There was a huge fence around the entire area along with a giant sign that read, "Welcome to the Oakwood HOA Community Pool." Inside were lounge chairs, umbrellas, tables, a snack bar, and dozens of people relaxing like they were at some luxury neighborhood resort. My jaw literally dropped. I just stood there staring in disbelief because none of it made any sense. This was my property. I had the deed. I had the survey. I had every legal document proving ownership. It honestly felt like I had somehow stepped into an alternate reality. For a solid minute, I couldn't even process what I was looking at. My first thought was that there had to be some kind of misunderstanding. A massive misunderstanding, sure, but still mistake. So I walked toward the entrance gate. A guy wearing a polo shirt with the HOA logo stopped me before I could go inside. He asked if I was a resident of the neighborhood. I told him no, but explained that the entire pool facility had been built on my private land. The guy actually laughed at me. Not nervous laughter either. Smug laughter. Then he told me I was mistaken and insisted the property belonged to the HOA. He acted like I was some random lunatic, making things up, and basically told me to leave before he called the police for trespassing. Trespassing on my own property. The nerve of these people was unbelievable. That was the exact moment I realized this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple conversation. This was going to turn into a full-blown fight. I stormed back to my cabin furious. The second I got home, I pulled out every piece of paperwork I had. The deed, the survey maps, the tax records, everything. And every single document confirmed the same thing. That 5-acre section absolutely belonged to me. The HOA had literally built their entire community pool complex on private property they didn't own. Next, I decided to contact the HOA president directly. I found her number online and mentally prepared myself for what I assumed would be another frustrating conversation. Turns out, she was even worse than the guy at the gate. I explained the situation calmly and professionally. I told her I had legal documentation proving ownership of the land and offered to provide copies. She didn't even let me finish speaking. She immediately cut me off and said, "Sir, that's impossible. We purchased that land legally. We have the deed." So I asked if she would show me their deed, and I offered to show her mine in return. She refused instantly. Then she told me the matter was closed and warned that if I continued contacting the HOA, she would file a harassment complaint against me. And then she hung up. I just sat there staring at my phone in disbelief. These people were completely stonewalling me while acting like I was the crazy one. At that point, I knew I needed legal help because this had gone far beyond some accidental property dispute. This felt intentional, like a straight-up land grab. Luckily, my lawyer was excellent. The moment I laid out all the document in front of him, his eyes practically lit up. He told me this was one of the clearest cases of property encroachment he had ever seen. He immediately drafted a formal legal letter to the HOA that included copies of my deed and the official property survey. In the letter, we gave them two options. Option 1. They could buy the land from me at current market value, which by now had gone way up because of all the expensive improvements they had built on it. Or Option 2. They could remove everything. The pool, the fencing, the snack bar, all of it. And they would also have to restore the land back to its original condition. We gave them 30 days to respond. 30 days passed. Then 31. Nothing. No phone call. No email. No response whatsoever. They completely ignored us like they thought I would eventually get tired and disappear. Big mistake, because they picked the wrong person to mess with. After the deadline expired, my lawyer looked at me and said, "All right, if they want to play hardball, then let's play hardball." So we filed a lawsuit. The legal fight dragged on for almost an entire year. It was exhausting, expensive too. Between court filings, attorney fees, and constant stress, there were definitely moments where a weaker person probably would have walked away from the whole thing. But I wasn't about to let an HOA steal part of my land and get away with it. Eventually, the case finally made it to court, and honestly, parts of the hearing were almost laughable. The HOA's attorney stood up and presented their argument, but their entire case basically boiled down to confidence and wishful thinking. They insisted the land belonged to the HOA and claimed they had their own survey proving it. There was just one tiny problem. When my lawyer asked them to produce the supposed survey, they couldn't because it didn't exist. It turned out the HOA had never actually commissioned a survey at all. They had simply assumed the 5-acre parcel was part of their subdivision and went ahead building on it without ever verifying ownership. The judge looked genuinely irritated. First, he reviewed my official registered survey. Then he looked over my deed and tax records. Then he looked at the HOA's complete lack of evidence. The contrast was brutal. The ruling came down fast. The court found entirely in my favor and officially confirmed that I was the rightful owner of the land. Then the judge issued a direct order to the HOA. They had 90 days to remove everything they built: the swimming pool, the fencing, the snack bar, every single structure. And once it was gone, they were required to restore the property back to its original condition. I can't even describe the relief I felt walking out of that courtroom. After a year of stress and fighting, justice had finally won, or so I thought, because as the 90-day deadline got closer, I noticed something interesting. Nothing was happening. The pool was still there, still operating, still full of water and packed with residents. The fence hadn't moved an inch. It was like the court order simply didn't exist. The HOA was blatantly ignoring it. At that point, they were essentially in contempt of court, and my lawyer was furious. He told me they were betting that I wouldn't push things any further. In their minds, they thought they could drag this out forever until I got tired. Then he reminded me of something very important. The court had already ruled the land belonged to me, which meant I now had every legal right to use my property however I wanted. And that's when inspiration struck. A glorious, ridiculous, slightly evil idea. See, I had already been planning to start a cattle ranch eventually. I'd even been researching livestock and looking into buying cows. And what do cows need? Water. Preferably a large watering area. A very, very large watering area. The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, I contacted a company that rented industrial-grade water pumps. I asked for the biggest one they had available. After that, I called a local farmer and purchased 10 head of cattle. I told him I needed them delivered the following day. The farmer sounded a little confused by the urgency, but business is business. That evening, I stopped by a hardware store and bought a heavy-duty pair of bolt cutters. By then, my masterpiece was fully planned. The next morning, I drove my truck straight to the pool facility. The industrial pump arrived right on schedule. I walked up to the gate, used the bolt cutters to snap the lock clean off, and casually entered my property. Since it was early in the morning, Nobody was around yet. I positioned a massive pump beside the pool and dropped the intake hose into the deep end. Then I ran the output hose toward a nearby drainage ditch that emptied into a creek. Once everything was connected, I fired the machine up. The engine roared to life. And suddenly thousands upon thousands of gallons of water started blasting out of that swimming pool. It was magnificent. I stood there watching the water levels slowly drop for hours. By late afternoon, the entire pool was empty. No crystal blue water anymore. Just a giant concrete pit sitting in the middle of my land. Right on cue, the truck carrying my cows arrived. The delivery driver looked at me, then at the empty pool, then back at me again with the most confused expression I've ever seen. I just smiled and told him, "Go ahead and unload them right here." The guy shrugged and lowered the ramp. The cows wandered out cautiously at first, but before long, they discovered the empty pool basin. A few of them casually walked down the shallow end steps and started exploring the giant concrete structure like it was the most normal thing in the world. Honestly, it was perfect, but I wasn't done yet. Next, I called a water delivery company. You know, the kind people hire to fill up swimming pools. The irony of that moment was almost too good. I paid them to refill only the deep end with about 3 feet of fresh water. The cows absolutely loved it. They splashed around happily, drank their fill, and lounged beside the water like they owned the place, which technically they did. My HOA-funded, court-approved cattle trough was officially open for business. It didn't take long for word to spread through the neighborhood. Soon residents started gathering outside the fence staring in absolute disbelief. Their faces were priceless as they watched cows standing inside their beloved community swimming pool. Then the HOA president showed up. The same smug woman who had hung up on me months earlier. She came storming toward me furious, her face bright red as she started yelling, "What have you done? This is HOA property." I calmly pulled out a copy of the court order and held it up. Then I smiled and said, "Ma'am, according to the judge, this is my property. Those are my cows, and this is now their water trough. If you disagree, feel free to take it up with the court." She didn't even know how to respond. She just stood there sputtering in shock, while one of my cows let out a loud moo from the deep end of the pool. To this day, it remains the most satisfying moo I've ever heard in my life. That was finally enough to break the HOA's arrogance. A few days later, their attorneys contacted my lawyer desperate to negotiate a settlement. This time their tone was completely different. They offered to purchase the land from me at a premium price and agreed to cover every cent of my legal fees on top of it. And honestly, it was an extremely generous offer. I thought about it for a little while, looked over my cows relaxing inside that ridiculous swimming pool, and finally decided to accept. The HOA paid up. I walked away with a very healthy profit. And the first thing I did with that money was buy an even larger piece of land far away from any neighborhoods, subdivisions, or HOAs. Then I finally started building the cattle ranch I'd wanted all along. And trust me, after that experience, I plan to stay as far away from HOAs as humanly possible. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.